The movie opens at the prestigious Stratford University, where we meet our hapless hero Daryl Witherspoon. Daryl's already spread thinner than stale toast trying to give a campus tour, while simultaneously working his mail route. You'd think juggling 2 gigs at once would make the guy a bit distracted, but oh no, Daryl cheerily points out the biology building while stuffing letters into mailboxes without missing a beat. After Daryl wraps one tour only to pick up another group, we catch him catching some zizzes back in his modest dorm, lulled to sleep by the dulcet tones of ESPN highlights. Just then, his mom calls, jolting him awake and nagging him about his job prospects. Daryl smoothens it over, claiming he's a top contender for some hotshot position. But the only thing our boy is contending for is Brocas college student, as we see when the tuition office rings him up demanding payment. Quick-thinking Daryl pretends to be a relative, announcing Daryl's untimely death, wincing as he hangs up. Desperate Daryl tries earning some dough donating his precious bodily fluids, but only succeeds in passing out at the blood bank and shooting blanks at the sperm bank. Poor guy. Still short on cash, he marches over to a campus hair salon, resolved to sell his luscious locks only to be shown the door when he suggests donating his lower mane instead. The next day in the dining hall, Daryl's classmate Scott approaches, evidently his rival for the prestigious job. The two puff out their chests like roosters, trading jabs on who's better qualified. Just then, the lovely Janice struts in, instantly capturing Daryl's attention and imagination. As Daryl daydreams about Janice in class, a representative from Smythe Industries explains the qualifications for the job. They want flashy sports stars and popular social butterflies. Scott's clearly got it in the bag, the smug jerk. Not one to give up, desperate Daryl decides he needs to pump up his athletic cred. He approaches the ice hockey coach begging for a tryout, despite not knowing a hockey stick from a selfie stick. Though initially rejecting him, the coach finally caves under pressure from the captain, Daryl's roommate Tim. Daryl excitedly laces up, visions of glory dancing in his head. But his dreams of an epic athletic debut soon melt away as pucks repeatedly pelt, his body like he's a human dartboard. Daryl spots a flyer for some neuropsychology study offering cash to participants. Broke student that he is, he signs right up. There he nods off as the presenters outline the study, drugs near supernatural sensory enhancements. Perking up at the mention of payment, a groggy Daryl stays behind as the room clears, ignoring the mumbled side effects. This guy must really need the money. Daryl meets with Dr. Whedon, who explains he needs to inject himself nightly with 6 doses of butt juice, the study drug. He warns Daryl he may feel slightly disoriented, which to me sounds like a normal Friday night in college. Later, Daryl works up the courage to ask out the lovely Janice, and miracle of miracles, she says yes. His elation quickly turns sour, though, when his smug jerk-off classmate, Scott, crashes the party to humiliate our boy in front of everyone. Feeling lower than the sticky frat house floor, Daryl heads home to sadly jab himself in the behind with dose number 1. The next day in class, that disorientation kicks in big time as Daryl's senses go into overdrive. Tiny noises like pencils scratching and watches ticking now sound like WW3 in his head. Even a classmate's bling necklace shining puts Daryl on tilt. The professor asks if he's okay, but by now Daryl is making faces like he got Botox and a bad nose job. Daryl storms off to Whedon's office to chew him out over these unbearable side effects, but the good doctor reassures him that feeling crazy is perfectly normal as the drug kicks in. Daryl's left wondering if he should ask for a refund on this wacky study. Dr. Whedon tells Daryl the only way to get a grip on his haywire senses is to practice, 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 like his life is now an 80s montage training sequence. So Daryl starts his sensory training, honing his abilities like a X-Men reject. Soon he's got full control and super senses to boot. By day, Daryl continues slinging sloppy joes in the dining hall, but by night he lurks the campus with his super hearing. When the Smythe execs meet to pick finalists for the job, usurper Daryl uses his powers to make a flashy entrance that would put Evel Knievel to shame. The stunned execs decide they must have this sensory whiz kid be their 6th finalist. Later, eavesdropping stalker Daryl overhears his crush, Janice, gushing about wanting a smart, caring boyfriend. Convinced she's describing him to a T, Daryl starts sniffing her out like a bloodhound as soon as she exits the bathroom. He gets right up in her personal space to compliment her perfume, which understandably freaks her out until she recognizes it's just clueless Daryl. Maybe personal boundaries should have been part of that sensory training, eh, Doc? This impresses Janice, and she asks if he would like to have dinner with her. She even kisses him on both cheeks, making him blush redder than a stop sign. The next day, Tim spots Daryl using injections on his buttocks and deduces that he has become addicted to dairy products in order to bulk up for hockey tryouts. Daryl tries to play it cool, saying he just really likes ice cream. Later in college, Daryl impresses the hockey coach with his skillful skating and even saves a puck flying towards them, preventing an accident. As a result, he is allowed to join the team. Taking full advantage of this opportunity to live out his Mighty Ducks fantasy, Daryl excels in the game, saving every goal like he's playing net in street hockey back home. Even Scott is left in awe of his performance, though slightly jealous that Daryl is living his dream of being varsity quarterback and hall monitor. The scene then shifts to an inter-college ice hockey match, and the commentators mention that Stratford University has a terrible history with the game, having not won a match since the era of the horse and buggy. But this time, they have no idea that Daryl is playing as stopper. His team takes an early lead as Daryl stones opponent after opponent. In the end, Stratford wins a game for the first time ever, and everyone celebrates the success like they just won Olympic curling gold. Next, Daryl goes for an interview at the Smythe-based corporation office. Using his superpower to eavesdrop, he listens to the questions being asked in the interview happening in the next room. Daryl then fills in the same information that other interviewees had missed earlier during his own interview. With this, he impresses Randall Tyson, one of the board members, who wants Daryl to impress Arlo Vickers, a potential client of their company, with his totally ethical interview skills. Our boy agrees to this right away, as he's always willing to use his powers for good, never evil. Tyson then informs Daryl that the final decision will be made within 5 days. Daryl waits anxiously, knees bouncing like a jackhammer. That night, Daryl invites Janice for dinner and cooks delicious meals for her using every cooking gadget known to man. Later, the duo enjoys the food and each other's company over candlelight. During the conversation, Daryl impresses Janice by dedicating beautiful and romantic lines for her from a poem that his roommate Tim is reading in the other room. Daryl is as smooth as chunky peanut butter. Surprisingly, this excites Janice so much that she kisses him. Then, they find themselves in an intimate moment, but Daryl concludes his performance quicker than a blink. This premature grand finale leaves Janice disappointed, prompting her to skedaddle out the door in a hurry. The next night, Daryl surprises his family by bringing Janice along and introducing her to everyone. His mother praises his friendly behavior to Janice, while Daryl talks with his siblings about the latest memes. Before leaving, Daryl gives some money to his mother to help her with household expenses, making her emotional that her boy is so generous even after that steamy bedroom fiasco. Back in the dorm, Tim finds Daryl using the drug again and becomes concerned about him. This time, he inquires about it to Daryl, and the latter tries to explain the positive results he's experiencing, though struggling not to incriminate himself. However, Tim does not believe him for a hot second, and assumes Daryl has become addicted to drugs like a junkie. Desperate to prove that he is not an addict and that it has only positive effects, Daryl takes a double dose of the drug. The next day, after his encounter with the superpower drug, he wakes up feeling more numb than a frozen mini wheat, with his arms and legs so heavy that walking feels like a mission in slow motion. Seeing his friend wobbling around like a newborn deer, Tim immediately calls a drug support group for help before Daryl hurts himself. Meanwhile, Daryl somehow manages to reach Dr. Whedon's clinic and tells him about exceeding the dosage. The doctor explains that the double dose has caused a serotonin surge, desensitizing his receptors. He then mentions that only 4 of Daryl's senses can work simultaneously, constantly switching the 5th. This means at any moment, he will either be blind as a bat, deaf as a doornail, or mute as a mime, and so on. Dr. Whedon explains the only solution is to wait for the drug to pass through his system. By his calculation, it will take 3 days, so Daryl will have to stay in bed twiddling his thumbs. However, Daryl cannot waste a single day, as he has a final competition for the job coming up. The scene shifts to a basketball match where Daryl sits with Tyson. Soon, the special guest Vickers arrives to inspect as well. Daryl's main task is to impress Vickers with his skills. However, after a few minutes, he starts feeling funny in the tummy. His senses start playing tricks on him. He mistakes people standing for the national anthem as a beer run opportunity. His eyes get blurrier than his messy college dorm, and he even talks to himself like a crazy person. Vickers finds Daryl's odd behavior amusing and laughs at him. During the game, a player throws him to the court for insulting his mother, and the meeting with Vickers doesn't go as planned. But despite the situation going south faster than a migrating goose, Tyson informs Daryl that they are still good, as they still have a chance to woo Vickers with his drug-induced comedy act. Later at night, in the dorm, Tim sees a girl, Lorraine, entering their room and rushes to inform the drug support group, thinking it's another potential problem with Daryl's medicine usage. Lorraine, who is actually Janice's sister, flirts with Daryl, but his senses are still scrambled like a bad radio frequency, and he can't hear her properly. Just as his hearing returns, Lorraine starts to kiss him, but Daryl can't feel anything due to the numbing effect of the drug. When he fails to perform, Lorraine gets disappointed and leaves. Unfortunately, at the same time, Janice arrives there and notices her sister looking more chaotic than a frat house after a rager. Janice then enters Daryl's room and finds him naked on the floor in a compromising position. This upset Janice and she walks away, but not before kicking Daryl's eggplant emojis. Soon the support group arrives, but when they enter Daryl's room, they find that he is already passed out colder than a freezer. They consider giving him an epinephrine shot, thinking he has overdosed, but luckily, he wakes up just before they can stab him with it. Following this, Tim confronts Daryl about the medicine, and he finally explains the truth, saying he only wanted to earn some extra cash, not turn into a spaced-out druggie. The next morning, Daryl goes to play the ice hockey match for his college, and everyone hopes that he can win it for them, like before. Unfortunately, his sensory condition derails the game, and Daryl cannot even save a single shot, fumbling the puck like a Butterfingers box. Despite his health going down the toilet, Daryl remains determined and focuses on cramming like a college student to get ready. On the day of the interview, Daryl steps out of his car, but his eyes become blurrier than the last morning of Coachella. He asks a homeless man for directions to the Smythe-based corporation office. Unfortunately, the man takes advantage of Daryl's vulnerability and leads him to a dark corner, where he beats him up and robs all his clothes, leaving him naked as a jaybird. Daryl somehow manages to cover his nether regions with a trash can lid and reaches a clothing store to get new threads. Unfortunately, upon arriving at the office, he realizes the dress he has selected is inappropriate for the interview. He looks like he's about to walk the red carpet at the Oscars. At the same time, the drug starts working its magic, causing him to wet his pants like a toddler. He enters the competition room, defending his attire by saying he's violently allergic to formal clothing. Soon, the final interviews begin, and Daryl and Scott end up competing like two alpha dogs. When faced with a tiebreaker question from Professor Engel, Scott fumbles his response, but Daryl comes up with a brilliant answer that would impress Einstein. This wows Tyson, and he offers Daryl the job. However, our boy feels guilty about cheating with the drug, so he comes clean about his actions on stage. Despite the shocking revelation, Tyson respects his honesty and still offers him a junior position at the firm. Fast forward a year, we see Daryl as junior analyst entering the Smythe-based building to start his dream job. The movie ends with a heartwarming scene, revealing Daryl and Janice got hitched and are moving into a suburban house to start a family like the ending of a rom-com.